My name is John O'Hagan. I started with the Corps in 1958 in the navigation section with Mike Kalesser, who was just a terrific person. And eventually I became chief of that section when he became chief of Chesapeake Bay. And then I went on to become chief of operations in 1971. I retired in 1997 after 25 years as chief. And it was a great job. We had the dams in Pennsylvania, we had the dredging in Chesapeake Bay, and we had the permit program, the three major items in the operations division. I had only been in the job a year when Agnes occurred. I had gone around and met all the dam tenders. We had a meeting, so I could put a name with the dam, and that worked very well. But when Agnes occurred, you had me with about 1 year in the job. We had a brand new chief of construction. And if you don't mind me saying, he thought the Wyoming Valley was in Wyoming. And I mean, he was a great guy, but he was brand new. I guess the thing I remember, there's two things I remember about Agnes, and I'll go back to some of the beginning, but is Rod Resta, chief of engineering division, on a Saturday morning, met with the staff and the district engineer and said the Wilkes-Barre levees were going to be overtopped. It was just hard to believe. And there wasn't a thing we could do about it. I mean, the water was on its way and sandbagging was, for the length, it just wasn't possible. And that was really a crushing blow, I think, to many of the engineers that they had, you know, the design had been made and to the 100-year storm, and they were going to have this, so to speak, failure of the, not that the levees would fail, but they'd be overtopped. But Hornell and that area, one of the fellows in Whitney Point's mother was on the roof of her own house in Hornell and had to be rescued by boat. So it was very tragic, the whole situation. Now, as far as operations is concerned, the dams had never seen spillway flow, and no one ever expected them to have spillway flow, and here we had spillway flow. And, you know, it's like, I was thinking, I hate to give sports analogies, but you train a team, and you don't really control them when they get on the court, like a basketball team. I mean, you can call timeout and everything, but they have to do the play. And that's what I think happened with us. We're in Baltimore, and the dam tenders just did a great job. They knew what they were going to do. The New York ones particularly had a camaraderie among themselves, and they helped each other out. One fellow from Whitney Point went over to Alman to be the dam tender. He may have been helicoptered over, I guess. It was just a really team approach. And Dave Dittman and the F&M people would go around. The evenings, during the day, hydrology would be telling the dam tenders how much water to let out. Well, it wasn't much to do because it was spillway flow, but they were monitoring everything. There was a crisis center downstairs in the federal building, and things went smoothly. It was panic, but not paralysis or anything like that. Everyone knew what to do. Rod Resta was very good as chief of engineering, and George Hupfer was foundations. Eddie Harned, H&H. You know, spillway flow wasn't supposed to happen, and I think we had 4 or 5 dams that had it. We have one concrete dam over at East Sydney, John McCowan, but the dam tenders did a marvelous job, just a marvelous job. Then when we come down on the Potomac River, we had a drift removal crew over there. Harry Moran was in charge of that. And this is a couple days later. And Harry, I remember, wanted to make sure that the tidal basin, we have a responsibility there for the gates. And so Harry went down to make sure the flood control gate was in. The other thing is Operations Division had 2 employees killed. Dwayne Tyler and Bob Crook on a Sunday were looking around at the damages in New York State, particularly Crosby Creek and Canandaigua. We had levee responsibility there. As you know, most of the levees are maintained by the locals, but because of quirks in the law authorizing the levees, some of the levees in New York State, we had the responsibility. And so Dwayne had a small outfit up there that would go around repairing, hiring contractors, things like that for our levees. And New York State, being at the top, had some crushing floodwaters coming down these very steep ravines. Crosby Creek was one, Canandaigua Creek was another. Anyhow, he decided that he'd get a helicopter because you could not go, you couldn't have a car. I mean, all the roads were closed, it was flooded everywhere. So they hired a helicopter, and they were looking around the projects when the pilot hit the overhead wires and it crashed into Crosby Creek, and 2 of my employees died. That helicopter had also ferried Dave Dittman and George Hupfer from F&M to different dams. So it wasn't just, it was like you couldn't get around, and maybe you could get around in some places, but you couldn't get it with any kind of speed because you didn't know how the roads were. And I think Dave tells a story, he got off at Bush Dam, and then Dwayne and the pilot went up to New York State where the crash occurred. It was a Sunday when Fran Hogan, who was over at Whitney Point, called up and said, "I don't know how to tell you this, Mr. O'Hagan." I said, "What?" And he said, "Well, there's a report that a helicopter crashed at Crosby Creek, and I know Dwayne was over there." And it turned out he had died. About 4 or 5 days later, I had never seen floods, but the fellow who was driving with me, Carl Kaufman, marveled at the velocity of the water as we went through the valleys. And the thing I'll never forget is that I saw a mattress in a tree about 15 feet off the ground, and you looked around, it's just all flat. And you couldn't tell where the creek was, but that valley was full of water. I mean, it was just hard to believe. It really was. The dry dam at Indian Rock was full of water, and thank God that was fine. We had a dry dam that had never had spillway flow, and here we had a pool and spillway flow. And the levees, which we were responsible for on Codorus Creek, there wasn't a problem there either. But it was a lot of good teamwork at the time, and well-trained people who just did their duties and managed the whole thing. While we, from my standpoint, while we were in Baltimore, observing it, giving them advice, supporting them, but they're actually doing the work. I mean, they were sleeping at the dam, and yeah, it was quite a sight.